Hey, Petunio. Hey, sweet J Rose. Is that John Rose? That would be wild. If you're John Rose, let us know. If you're not John Rose, you can pretend to be John Rose and I won't know. Oh, he's gone. All right. Welcome, everybody.
Picking up my identity.
Yeah, he was like, oh, no. John Rose is an old friend. He's one of my very first mentors, actually. So that'd be kind of crazy. He goes by J Rose. Okay. I think we're just about ready. Awesome. We've got our first people in the room. Our live stream is streaming. Okay. I think we are ready to begin. I'm going to do a little tutorial. Welcome, everybody, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today, we're talking with Joe Baxter-Webb. We're talking about aspiring versus just doing. And we're going to start the formal recording in just a moment. Before then, for those who are here right at the beginning, thank you for being here. We're going to do a little bit of a tutorial to let you know how this podcast goes. So this is a 45-minute... Hey, Alec, what's up, dude? This is about a 45 to 50 minute podcast episode. For the first 20 to 25, we'll be talking with Joe here one-on-one, our guest for today, in order to give you an intro to who Joe is and get an intro on his areas of expertise. In the second half of the episode, we will be asking Joe questions from the community. So if you have questions for Joe, you can leave them in the chat in the top right if you're in Discord, or if you're on any of our streaming platforms, you can drop them in the regular old chat there. And in order to mark them, especially in the Discord, drop a Q emoji on that question so that it's easier for us to identify. So this is an example question like this. Then if you see a question you like and you want that question answered, you can hit that Q emoji again. That way we can see that many people want it answered. For the most part, we will go through those in chronological order. So the earlier you ask your questions, the more likely you are to get some Joe time. And besides that, Joe, you can ignore the questions in the chat because we will deliberately call them out during the Q&A session. I think that's mostly it before we actually start. Tim, am I missing anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, sweet. Let me get the bot here. Let me get the soundboard ready. So yeah, Joe, once we ask you what you're having for lunch, that's your cue. And for everybody else, we're ready to begin. Hold on, I have to pull the soundbot on stage. It's the most efficient way to run a soundboard possible. All right, here we go. Ready, Tim?
Ready.
Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour, the best dang indie game development podcast on the planet.
Today we're being joined by Joe Baxter-Webb to talk about there is no aspiring, only doing or not doing.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give listeners the chance to hear real stories of game development from real indie game developers, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode.
This is an unedited recording of a weekly event we host in the Indie Game Academy Discord on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So feel free to swing by for the next one and ask your questions live. There are links to join down below.
We're your hosts, Willem Delventhal, headmaster of the Indie Game Academy, and the Wizard of Games.
And I'm Tim Wood, founder of Rightfinder Headhunting and the Knight of Games Recruitment. And joining us today is Joe Baxter-Webb, game design educator.
So, Joe, what are you having for lunch today?
Well, I usually stream in the mornings UK time here. So immediately after that, I've been fasting for 14 hours. So it's into the fridge and handfuls of random items from the fridge, trying to make sure one of those things is green. But it's kind of like the loot box approach to lunch, you know? Eat or not eat, there is no fasting. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me, folks. I hope you've been enjoying your lunches, and hopefully they're a bit more structured and planned than mine.
I know that the food pyramid is labeled such that the green category just says at least one.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well, it's lovely to have
exactly.
you, 100%. It is lovely to have you on the show, Joe. So we wound up meeting Joe because we randomly solicited him on the internet to play our Foundry games that recently came out of the Indie Game student body. And he was nice enough to cover the games during their first day live on Kickstarter. And we had like a 3-hour stream with him where I keep describing you this way, where he was very firm but fair about our games and gave us a lot of healthy critical feedback about how the games could improve and how we could improve the Kickstarters, where their strengths were and where their weaknesses were. And honestly, it was awesome. I got the impression that there was a lot to learn from you and invited you on the show. And here we are.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I get the firm but fair a lot. I think there is I think there's not a lot of middle ground when it comes to kind of YouTubers and streamers. We tend to either be really horrible toxic people or people that are like all sweetness and light and want to be friends with everyone. So like finding a streamer who has a background in teaching, who is used to being sort of like calmly assertive with people is quite unusual, I guess, for a lot of people.
It's very true.
Firm with purpose is always important in an educational setting.
Indeed. Tim and I also know nothing about toxic positivity. It's definitely not something that we So one of the first things we like to ask on this show, Joe, is the origin story. So we'd love to hear where you are in games today and how you got there.
Yeah, so starting with the first bit, I have been working kind of professionally in games for 10 years. I got my first job when I was 28, so it was like 2015. It was a local mobile studio, and they were making games for a bunch of different publishers. And I got a job there as like an assistant producer I had a portfolio of like game jam games that I've made over the years, little game jams, board games, stuff like that. And that was what got me that role. And I also wrote a blog about design. And I think the guy that was looking for a producer at that studio saw my blog via Facebook or something like that, and there was a lot of stuff on there reflecting on practical stuff. And I didn't even know what a producer did in the studio at that time. It was just I'd blogged a lot about project management accidentally. And yeah, I did that for a couple of years. Then I taught for a couple of years at university. I helped establish a local game design degree, and then I went back into industry in 2023. I've had 2 jobs in industry since then. One was at a place called Carter, where we made, they call them metaverse, but that's like code words for Roblox and Fortnite now, right? We made some like big pop music games. So we made the social hub for Blackpink on Roblox. We made, yeah, that was surreal. We made a Spotify Fortnite map, and then I did a year after that at King, which is a very different experience. So none of this is indie games, right? This is all kind of games as service, free to play type stuff. And then, that's never been where my heart is, because who actually has their heart in free to play games as service games? I don't know anyone who does, or they've got like a weird kind of heart that I'm not familiar with. So yeah, I started the channel in the last year, but I've always made games. I've always enjoyed kind of trying out every type of creative thing. And I think the reason I gravitated towards games is they've got everything. They've got an amalgamation of everything, and you can jump between disciplines. So, yeah, I kind of had been making games as a hobbyist since I was about like 11 or 12, and some of that was messing around with board games. Some of it was, I kind of got into it in the heyday of level editors, when we had some of the best level editors, where we had the like Warcraft 3 one and the Half-Life one, and you just got these. I mean, the closest thing to it now, if people are interested in that side of things, would be like, in the last couple of years, they released UEFN, which is the Fortnite editor that uses Unreal, and you can just open Unreal Engine and get all of these toys, this big toy box of like planes and all of these different things out and make stuff with it. And that's like the closest thing I've come to how I got into game design in recent years. So yeah, I've been bouncing back and forth between designing and doing production and creative leadership roles in industry, and then doing teaching. And over the last year, I've built up a following on YouTube through this channel, where the whole premise is I workshop people's games like we would do in one of your classes, really, where you workshop stuff mid-development to kind of help give it a steer, help give people an outside opinion. And I have a pretty strict rule that my mainstream I do every Thursday doesn't have games that are up for sale in it, Like the games have to still be in production. They have to still be in an alpha stage. If the game has a price tag on it, then I perceive that as like the developer has decided this is launch ready. So they're not really submitting it for feedback. They're submitting it for, marketing purposes, and that's not what this is for. This is so I'm a bit strict. I have a form people have to submit, and it's like you do realize I'm going to rip your game to pieces, right? Because people like Chris Zukowski and stuff, they're telling all of the developers, send your games out to like 100 people. So I have to really vet the games before I lay into them, because I don't want someone to send me their game and then get really upset that I've been really critical because they didn't realize what the show was. So that's kind of where I came from. I'm a multimedia guy. I got into design because I like everything and I like being involved in everything. And if you were to explain game design to someone who doesn't really understand from outside, it's like every decision that goes into a game that isn't actually the programming or the art, right? It's all of the glue in the middle. So yeah.
Super interesting. I love that I feel like a lot of your early journey through game dev mirrors some of my own. The Warcraft 3 editor was one of my first like playthings as well. I remember making a Battle for Helm's Deep, which had actual, I'm going to do, for those who are listening, air quotes here, coding that, spawned enemies at various times. So like waves of baddies. And I thought it was so cool. And I agree. It's interesting that today our equivalent is the metaverse, aka Roblox and UEFN, and creating content for other people's games, and how that's become so prevalent. I'm curious, you touched on this. I'd love to hear, you got your start in this free-to-play marketplace, learning games as a service, which is very much sort of modern era of how games make money, and you transitioned into indie games. Was the transition simply for sort of like the love of the little guy, the David versus Goliath, or is there some other kind of motivation that brought you to focus on indie instead?
That's a really good question. I would say it comes down to my own personal interests of what excites me. I don't really consider myself an indie game developer, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more in a little while. I'm someone with a professional game design background. The show is called Indie Game Clinic because it's like, I have a doctorate. I'm a doctor. People understand that's a joke. I'm not a medical doctor, right? But games come into the clinic and I do surgery on them. It's a surgery type thing. But I don't really consider myself an indie game developer, because indie is like a publishing term for how a game was produced, right? So anyone who develops or designs games is a developer or a designer. You are your habits. You are what you do. But indie is a specific label to do with like how something was financed and created. So I do the channel the way I do because I'm not really interested in reviewing someone's, Skinner box that is trying to sell people gems or something or stuff like that. So for me, I'm still from the period of like, Team Meat and Newgrounds and early Devolver, where indie is this kind of punk DIY ethos. So for me, there's a distinction between like indie as a signifier of like, you're going to get something a bit weird and unusual versus just like everyone who's making a game in their bedroom is making an indie game, So yeah, I don't know. I think it is really just, I really like seeing people making something. It doesn't have to be totally innovative and out there, but something that is clearly an expression of their tastes and what they're interested in. And then being able to use my background. And a lot of it comes down to like, a lot of what I end up commenting on is like cohesion, like how coherent is the whole game, like the creative direction of it. And then a lot of little UX things. A lot of things just end up being tiny little UX things of like, why doesn't that button go in when you click it? And why is there no sound effect on that thing? And I like being able to like basically help these really passionate developers who are working on something that is already quite cool. And I just sort of help them with the boring bits, like pointing out all the little boring things that are like quality of life things that other people wouldn't even bother to notice, but I know would make a difference in the user experience, and like the sort of things that would stop someone playing their demo 10 minutes in and they wouldn't even leave feedback because it would be such a kind of minor thing, So that's kind of the way I see myself. It's like the boring guy that helps you with the boring stuff so that your exciting, interesting game can do better and have a better chance at success,
Just to build on that slightly, like what you've obviously looked at hundreds of games that are coming into your clinic for, what is essentially triage and emergency surgery. Are there any kind of common threads for the frequent flyer problems? Like, are you going through things and going, oh gosh, it's this thing again? Because people who are primarily perhaps design coded might all have the same sort of area that could be uplifted. Are there any kind of things that you'd list on your proverbial FAQ?
Yeah, I mean, there are those kind of recurrent trouble areas, and they're very different. And I think they tend to be problems that gravitate around what type of developer it is and what their mentality is. So one of the big problems is people working in a genre because they think that's the big hotness right now, right?
Yeah.
So we had this with like Bullet Heaven Survivors clones for the last year, really. We're going to have it with incremental games because they've had a resurgence. And it's like sometimes the people that are operating in that way that are just like, I must make something commercially successful and I must get out in the next 6 months. And what's hot right now, I'll make that. Those people tend to not play the games enough to understand what is actually the core appeal of them. So they either make like a very sort of lackluster clone that doesn't compete when you put it up to the next thing. And like every time with one of those games, I'm going, why would I play this instead of Vampire Survivors, right? Why would I? It's not the same level of quality. It's not beating it in any way. And then sometimes you get people that just deviate from the original design in a way that breaks it. And the classic ones are like, oh, I want to make a deck builder, but without broken combos. And it's like, well, do you understand the mentality of anyone who plays deck builders? Because that's not fixing a problem. That's breaking the core appeal, you know? So yeah, I would say like chasing the hotness without really understanding the appeal of the hotness. That's a really common one. Doing this kind of problem-based design where you try and fix a problem that isn't really a problem. That's one. And I quite that's kind of I think that's quite admirable. I think that's a good way of approaching design, to take a genre you don't like and being like, what would I do to change this to make it something new and interesting. I think that's quite admirable. But sometimes you have to work out whether you're just breaking it and making a game for no one by doing that. And then I think sometimes you get games that are just a monster where it feels like the developer is trying to put so many things they like into one thing, and it's like the everything burrito from Adventure Time. With it's got the salad in, and it's got some M&Ms in, and it's got or like the other example I would always use from design is, dude, this is like classic boomer podcast thing where everyone tries to explain everything through Simpsons references, and anyone under 30 is like, look, I haven't seen every episode of The Simpsons, but the Homer car, where Homer Simpson gets asked to design a car for the everyman, and he makes like the most atrocious car that's just got like 12 cup holders and a dome over the top. That's kind of like the design you get sometimes where there's basically a point when you're making a game where you have to let the game take over and work out what the game wants to be and narrow it down to that experience. And that might not be exactly what you want. And it might mean killing some of your darlings around like features in the game and stuff to get the game really focused, right? And yeah, sometimes you just get these bloated games that just have so many features that are unrelated to each other and don't seem to go together. And again, that's another one of those things where it's a shame, because it's admirable that all that work's gone in, but it just needs to be more focused.
That is, I have definitely never made a game that is a disconnected conglomeration of features that I thought were cool. That's absolutely not a problem I've ever had. So it's weird that you bring that up. I have a all right, I'm going to ask a personal question here, because this is one that I wonder about so much. You mentioned that there's these people who come in and they're like, I need to make a commercially successful game. I'm going to follow the trends. I'm going to do hopefully the research. I'm going to play the game and try to understand why this genre is compelling and why it's done so well lately. And I'm going to make a fast follow and make money. And then I think what I have seen is that you also get people way on the other end of the spectrum who are like deeply indie, and they're like, man, screw all of that. I'm just going to make what I want to make. And I feel like those they have their own toxicity on both sides of that spectrum.
Yes. Yeah,
so
yeah.
like, where I don't know. I still don't have a great answer for what is the right combination of those two, because I do think that any game that has a chance of commercial success needs at least a certain amount of both of those things. And I don't know where the right line is. What do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, it's hard, and I think that is your job as a game developer, right? Is to walk that line. There isn't a correct answer, and the iterative process of like making the game, tweaking it, testing it with people, tweaking it, doing the initial appeal test of showing people a fake screenshot and going, do you like this? Like first Darkest Dungeon, right? One of the most popular indie games of all time. That funded fully on Kickstarter with a fake animation that wasn't even real gameplay, right? It was just, here's the art style, here's how we imagine stuff in this game will move around and bash into each other. Like, you have to do appeal tests as well of like, do people get, if they like the central fantasy and the art style, then you build a game around that, whatever. But yeah, I think walking the line of like those two extremes is the goal, really. And you say like the fast follow kind of, I'm going to make the thing in the hotness, and the person you described is like going and playing all the games and researching them. That's great. If you're going to operate in that way and be like a market follower, then do it properly. Go and play 12 games and make a big chart and say, what features do all of these have? What is the amount of content that people expect? What are the features that every single one of these games has that is like you cannot cut this out type feature? If you're going to go down that route, do it properly, like research things really hard. And then if you're going to go down the route of like doing something weird and out there, I mean, that's kind of what I lean towards more as well. And the thing is, because I'm streaming my dev and like making some amount of money from streaming it, I can afford to just make things that are a bit weird and vibe driven. So I'm not a good template for that. But if you go down that route, then I would say the things to focus on are those little UX things of like, do people understand the basic interactions of the game? And one of the concepts I talk about often on streams is the weirdness budget, which is like, there's going to be something in your game that is weird and new. And that's probably the unique selling point. It's probably a really good thing, right? It's probably the coolest thing about the game. So if you're going to do that, don't make other bits of the game weird. Like, don't ask people to control a WASD game with I, J, and L on their keyboard, or like, like make as many parts of the game standard as you can so that the weird, unusual thing can really shine. And again, you do that. It's the same thing, really. You do that by studying all of these games and going, how do these games do their controls? How do they do their interactions? How do they like highlight objects when I hover over them or do tooltips and all of these things? And if you get those things right, then people will be more willing to get on board with you to go along for like a weird experience. Yeah.
So a question I have for you with my kind of recruitment hat on, I love how you kind of got into the industry, because you were blogging about kind of production without meaning to, and just talking about design and really following your passion. And often I meet a lot of people like that who will add me on LinkedIn, and they've got that classic job title, I'm an aspiring game developer, or I'm an aspiring game designer, whereas you're out there kind of just doing it. So like, I guess, how did that come about, and how did that help you, if indeed it did, when you first penetrated the industry?
Yeah, I think the problem with the kind of aspiring thing is people think game designer or game developer is a professional title, and that's why they won't call themselves that until they've got a job, or they've self-released an indie game. It's like, if you're a musician, you're just a musician. You might not be a professional musician, you might be an amateur musician, but you would still define yourself as a musician whether you do it for a living or not, right? So it's kind of that thing. In terms of, I guess it's a strange one. I think when it comes to careers, like creative careers, like whether it's in games or anything else, and whether you're trying to get like a full-time position in a studio or just like piecework, a lot of it comes down to being opportunistic is like a dirty word, right? But you don't get opportunities unless you're like looking for them and all of that. And like everyone I know who has a full-time job in the creative industries, whether it's in comics or graphic design or something, is always like looking around for the next thing, and they're not roles where you can really get a job at a company and be there for 10 years. So you have to always be kind of looking around, and then looking at a thing that you don't think you can do right now and thinking, can I fake that until I make it type thing. I've got a friend who
So
is an
many of my
illustrator.
jobs.
Yeah, I've got a friend who is an illustrator, and like once a year she gets to go and do fashion photography, and that is because her friend took her along as like a grip or like a runner for one of her photography shoots, and ever since then she's been getting offered random work doing photography even though she doesn't have a background in it. And it's like that there's so much of that kind of stuff where it's like you don't, you know, if you're thinking about it from a recruiter's point of view, there are so many jobs that you just never see advertised because it's all based on like connections and headhunting and stuff like that. So I don't know if that was very actionable advice for anyone, but
I still think it's very useful context because, I mean, right now the industry has been on fire for the last 3 years, right, with getting jobs.
Oh.
I'm quite close to
Has it?
a lot of that data. Yeah, Willem's just been insulated from this entire thing. But you know, it's the thing I'm saying to a lot of, you know, aspiring developers is that, hey, if you're going out and doing the stuff, you're doing it, but also you've got to think about the sort of the soft marketing perception you have when you apply for jobs and when you're talking to decision makers, because they're looking to fill a specific requirement. So you need to almost be posturing yourself in the most applicable way for them to go, do I have confidence that this person can not only do the craft but also fit within our working pipeline in the specific way that we like to run it. I had it myself, you know. I kind of fell into creative copywriting because I started being sassy on LinkedIn, and I suddenly had people paying me to write stuff for them. That eventually led to me doing some game writing on a VR action title because my old kung fu instructor rang me up and said, "Oh, I see you do writing. Can you make my game have plot?" And I was like, "I'll give it a wild stab."
Just smile and nod.
You know. And it's literally like there's a lot of truth to what you said, Joe, in terms of the kind of, there is a degree of fake it till you make it, but it's all about just how you present things and consider what the person receiving your information is going to think of you and your skill set.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I can give some examples of that because the Metaverse studio I was like hiring manager for a few roles, and the thing about like applying for roles in the industry is obviously sometimes you just have to do the scattergun approach and like sit down one day a week and apply for a load of stuff and fingers crossed. But the roles you really want, you do have to tailor what you're doing, and that means like making sure the CV is in the right order so that the stuff that is relevant to the job is up the top, and making sure the cover letter acknowledges what the company does, shows you. This is all like basic stuff everyone gets recommended. There are some other things, like when I put a CV out, I put my CV and portfolio in the same document so that they can't get separated, because I don't want someone to look at one without the other. So I force them to look at both at the same time. So I have like a single page, who I am and what I've done, and then I have a portfolio of work, and then I put my normal CV stuff after that. And that seems to have worked quite well over the years. But one thing people should know as well is that if you do get to the stage where you get an interview, then we've already made a decision about your like hard skills. We've looked at your portfolio, we've looked at your previous job, and that interview is almost entirely about soft skills. And the biggest mistake I see people make in interviews is like not really understand that that's what the interview is. And I've seen often like programmers or technical design roles, you get the classic question, the killer question: tell me about a time you worked with others where things were going wrong and what did you do about it, you know? And that question is set up to see if you blame other people. And if you blame other people when you're asked that question, you will always fail the interview, because it is not a question about what you actually did. It's a question about how you talk about it, right? And if you go, I was in this group at college and we had a group project and everyone else was really lazy, so I had to do everything. Oh, then it's like, well, that's what you're like to work with, right? And you may think that reflects well on you because you did everything, but they don't want to hear that. They want to hear how you lifted everyone else up and got them working and gave them things to do and stuff like that. So yeah, I would bear that in mind. The interview is always nearly 90% about character, soft skills, company culture, and they've already made a decision on the hard skills and like, can you write documents or program and stuff before that, you know?
I want to. This is interesting. I want to give you a chance, Joe, if you'll entertain me, to add a little spice. Because we got for every guest we bring on this show, we ask them for potential topics, and then Tim and I choose which one feels the best for the audience. And I'll quote you here for a second, Joe. Joe gives us two very strong topics, and then adds a third one where he says, "And because I'm a contrarian, there is no aspiring, only do or not doing." So give us your hot take. Add a little bit of that spice, like. What are some of those maybe more negative practices, or how do people fall into that trap of being aspiring rather than just friggin' doing it?
Yeah, so I foolishly didn't use the Yoda formatting, which Petunio got to first in the chat. Do or not, that there is no try. The Yoda version is much better.
Yes.
It sounds a bit kind of wafty and kind of hippy dippy, right? But the thing about saying you're aspiring, again, it's like you're making the assumption that it's a profession and you're not doing it as a job. So you say, I'm an aspiring game dev or an aspiring game designer. You are your habits. If you are spending a set of, if you're spending 10 hours a week developing a game, you're a game developer,
yes.
Right? You might not be a professional game developer. You might not be an indie game developer, because again, that's a publishing term for like how your game was funded and how it was made. So you don't really become an indie developer until you finish developing a game, right? But everyone who designs a game is a game designer. Everyone who develops a game is a game developer. And if you're trying to avoid the like technical side of things, then you can be a game designer without being a full stack developer. You just need to focus on tabletop games and stuff like that. I think it's difficult. Like when I first got into it, I had quite intense imposter syndrome for a couple of years. And the way I professionalized myself was just to like bombard myself with professional perspectives, right? So what you're doing with this podcast now, I used to listen to designer notes a lot, which is like, interviews with designers, stuff like that. And the thing that is really freeing that you realize is all of these professional people that have worked on 10 games, doesn't matter if it's like, I'm going to list loads of indie developers' names, but, like anyone you could pick, like that has made loads and loads of games. No one really knows what they're doing. And that is, again, it's like I said a minute ago, the process.
Especially Tim.
I feel so called out right now.
Especially me. But the thing is, like, like we talked about earlier, of like, do you follow the market or do you do your weird little thing? Well, the job is actually to walk the line, and it's the same with this stuff. It's like the more you narrow down what you do, right? So an example would be like a studio that always does the same thing, like Zachtronics make the same variations of the same game over and over again. The more you narrow down what you're doing to what you're good at, whether it's visual novels, certain type of narrative, puzzles, whatever it is, the easier that will become, because you're always working within like this very narrow remit of like, this is what we do, right? It's like, being in a band that makes one genre of music. This is what we do. This is what we do well. And as you kind of go through your career, you will work out what that is, and you will be more successful the more you kind of stay in that area. And like, if you're really successful, then you can go wild and go outside of that area if you want to, but you probably wouldn't want to, because you want to be commercially successful, so you stay in the area. But no one really knows what they're doing. They just narrow down the kind of remit of what they're doing so that it falls within the area of stuff they're good at. And one of the things that I've noticed reviewing so many games is you can look at a game and it's always like a Rorschach test for who made it, right? Like, what does this person care about? What do they spend loads of time about? What are they obsessed with? And the only difference between a good game and a bad game is whether the person was aware that they were doing that, right? So like, you play Papers, Please by Lucas Pope. It's like, oh, this game was made by a UI guy. This was made by a UI guy with an interest in politics, right? It doesn't have anything in it that isn't focused on those interests. Like Inkle Studios that make Overboard and 80 Days and stuff. That is a studio with a very specific focus that does games based on what it's interested in, what it's good at, and not what it's not interested in or good at. And like your kind of role early on is to just work out what to discard from all the things a game can be, because a game can be so many things. It's such a big, broad, like, there are so many things we call games that are so just fundamentally different from each other. But the more time you spend actually doing it, the quicker you'll get to that stage where you stop thinking of yourself as aspiring and start thinking of yourself as a game designer. I think the other thing is the more you get involved in, and hopefully that's something people are being encouraged to do here, but the more there are actual people playing your games, whether they're commercial games or not, the quicker you'll get to a stage where you actually feel like a game designer, even if it's just like running a D&D campaign and home brewing some stuff in your D&D campaign. Games are a thing that people play, and your games will feel like games when you see other people playing them and other people are getting excited about them and going, oh, have you thought of doing this, and stuff like that. So the longer you spend kind of cooped up thinking that game development is just something you do in a game engine at your computer, the longer you will feel that imposter syndrome, because it doesn't really become a game until someone's playing it, you know?
I think that's really, I love that as a perspective. I think there's nothing, something we had to sort of adjust after a little while here. There's nothing wrong with being a sort of like hobby game developer, somebody who's just making a game because it's fun to make games. That's totally fine. And in that case, do whatever the hell you want. I think where the mismatch might happen is where somebody either expects commercial success and doesn't really do the steps to make that more likely. As you say, like, none of us actually know, and we're all kind of guessing. All we really do is narrow down the guess as best we possibly can. And then I think the other end of that problem is people who sort of expect things to happen to them or for them. People who rely on, I know I've been a victim of this myself, people who like expect their game to go viral or for some infinitesimally small thing to happen that makes the game succeed as a result of them really wanting it or something like that. And it sounds like a big part of what you're talking about is like knowing who you are and knowing what your strengths are and being very honest with yourself about that, and then putting in basically the reps to move yourself closer and further in that space that you know well.
Yeah, exactly. It's like putting in the reps is a good way of thinking about it. You know, it's a practice. And like, I think we're used to hearing the word practice as in like, I'm bad at something and I need to get better. And it's like, well, when you get your teeth looked at, you go to a dental practice, right? So someone is a practitioner because they do the thing. And I think the way of seeing it is you will just get better at the thing as you do it, but you have to commit to doing it for like a certain amount of hours. And the progress will come out of that. And it's difficult because game design does involve a lot of like in your head ideation. I like to kind of get away from the computer and go and walk and just like go. There's a cemetery like 200 yards from my house. I go and walk around the cemetery and I just sort of mutter to myself like some kind of Edgar Allan Poe character. And then people were like looking at me like, what's this guy going on about hit points and, you know, coins and stuff? So you do have to have time that you section out to do that, but sometimes you just need to kind of sit in front of a problem for like 4 hours and whatever happens. But yeah, putting in the reps and treating it as a kind of like exercise that you were going to do regardless is a good way of thinking of it, I think.
I liken a lot of things to food in my life, but you know, I'm a writer when I'm not recruiting, and I'm making my way through my second novel now, and it's like eating a very big pie. You've just got to cut it into a little slice that's manageable, where you don't give yourself heartburn, and you know it's a marathon, not a sprint. But no, Joe, you shared with us a really interesting activity idea in the kind of the pre-warm up for the session today. So I was wondering if you could walk us through your kind of your game pitch thing that you were telling us about.
Yeah, so I'll relate it a little bit. I'll give you a bit of the rationale first, because we were talking a little bit about finding what you're kind of uniquely suited to do. I got this from, I've recently been reading Up, Down, Up, which is a book by Kim Nordstrom, which is it's based on a bunch of interviews with different games company CEOs. And I'm going to do a quick plug. Game Developers Library, another podcast where myself and a co-host review books for game developers. But it talks about business theorist Jim Collins's idea of the hedgehog concept, which is basically if you see a hedgehog, they're really good at not getting eaten by a fox. And that's like the only thing they're good at. They're just incredibly well evolved for not getting eaten by a fox, right? And the idea of the hedgehog concept is like trying to work out what your qualities are that make you like a hedgehog. And they're not necessarily, it's not necessarily the most exciting things about you. It's the things that just make you best suited for success, right? So that would be the overlap of what you're uniquely passionate about. And that might be some weird technical thing to do with certain shaders in a game engine, or it might be like a type of board game that's never been made into a video game or whatever, just something that you're uniquely passionate about, something you're uniquely good at. And sometimes it's hard to get those things to work together, which is why this is a exercise worth doing. And then where is the overlap where someone will pay you, right? So passion, skill, and commercial viability. And like by thinking about what the thing is that kind of fits all those things together, not what you're excited about, not your dream game. You know, I'd love to make something like Civ, but I'm never going to make a 4X game, you know. Just what you would be uniquely suited to make something, make that would be successful. That's kind of a good exercise to occasionally sit down and do, because that's how you create, whether it's an individual game project or a studio that creates a particular type of thing. That's how you create these things that can survive, because you're thinking from like a sort of survival mentality, but it's survival based on being the best at something, right? Like being the best at not getting eaten by a fox because you're covered in spikes, right? So the kind of like homework or question I have for today is, or it's an exercise, I guess, is I always used to set this at university, because a lot of times people start doing game dev from this perspective of just like, I must take apart games that I know of and make a game out of all of the parts of all the other games. What I want people to try and do is think of something that you've done in your life. It can be an activity that you've done, or it can be a role that you've had. Like it could be something really mundane, like delivering papers, being a babysitter, you know, being a camp mentor or whatever it is. Something that you are uniquely knowledgeable about or have a unique experience of, and try and work out how you would pitch that as a game concept. And to think of it in terms of gameplay rather than story, I would try and frame it as the player does this set of actions, you know, action A, action B, action C to achieve this goal. And I think that's a really kind of useful design exercise to do, because it gets you outside of thinking about, you know, genre. It stops you thinking about like the standard game themes of like fantasy and sci-fi and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's a helpful thing for everyone to at least try doing at least once.
So the exercise, to make sure I understand it, and so that you can correct me if I'm not right here, is to pick something from your life, perhaps your profession or something that you know well, that isn't necessarily typically a game, and give us a sequence of steps what the player would do if that was a game. Is that correct?
Yeah, and try and, you know, use this as an exercise to think of like, it might be something that's really mundane to you, but you've just never heard of a game of it, and it could. And when you kind of sit down and think about it, you go, you know, think of these car maintenance games like My Summer Car. You know, if you describe that game to someone a couple of years before it came out, people would be like, "What? How is that a game?" But then you look at it, and it's like, "Yeah, this is brilliant. This works. This is exactly right." Digging a hole. You know, what was the Digging a Hole game called? Was it literally just called?
I think it's called Digging a Hole. Yeah, what a genius game!
But there's something about taking influence from mundanity, because you will have like an intimate knowledge of this thing because you've done it, even if it's just like operating a barbecue or something like that. You know, so
yeah. So I would love for those who are here in the Discord with us or are watching on stream, do this exercise right now. We'll have some commentary on some of the responses. It's an easy one. Give us a bullet point list of how your game would function. It brings to mind a lot of different things, actually. I think like we've had people, for instance, apply to some of our programs where they had a specific thing that they wanted to do really well. I feel like where I get the most weird ideas is somebody comes up with like a unique simulator idea. Like we had somebody who wanted to make realistic diving, and to make a game about like, you know, if you come up too fast, you'll get the bends. And I think for the longest time, I had a problem with that type of game, because we play games to fantasize. We don't play games to get the bends. But recently I ran into a case study called Golf Plus on I think it's on Horizon Worlds, but it's basically a VR game that is hyper realistic golf in VR, and they actually are a multi-million-dollar game now because there is actually an audience of people who want to play this hyper specific simulator. So I think I've had that. I think I've had that theory blown away that you can't do something super realistic.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a simulator, right? So
Yeah.
if you look at something like Consume Me, which was like that match 3 style game about eating habits, right? And that's you can take games and like express a theme in a way you wouldn't expect. You know, I played a game on stream earlier that was you're a robot sorting parcels in a sort of Amazon factory type thing, but the sorting is all done through a sort of like click and point and drag type. It felt like a football shootout game, like a soccer game. And I never would have put those two mechanics together, but it felt really satisfying to have that weird kinetic thing with that theme. And if you think like the boomers here will remember the Paperboy game, right? That was like a arcade game where you're like hurling papers horizontally and sometimes they hit a dog and stuff like that. There are ways of taking, I mean, like Shenmue, that's a cult classic, and so much of that game is just goofing around in a Japanese suburb doing really mundane stuff. So yeah, I think the sim thing is interesting because the golf, there's probably an overlap between the people that own the VR headsets and don't have games or aren't getting served many games and the sort of people that go to a golf course. So there's like there's a platform and theme overlap there. But yeah, you definitely don't have to go down the route of something being super realistic simulation for it to be inspired by like mundane every life. Like I wouldn't call Unpacking a simulation, and that's like one of the most successful indie games of the last couple of years, and did something really, really innovative with telling a story with no on-screen characters. You know,
Tim. So Tim, you may not know Tim, Joe, but Tim is a actual literal medieval knight. He jousts, he fights with swords, he shoots arrows. I don't think he owns real clothes. He only owns chainmail. I'm curious though,
My
Tim.
podcast outfit.
You're one.
That's less metal.
You're one regular human outfit.
it's just like a monk robe that you put on over the other stuff.
I just have one t-shirt and I wash it in the sink every night. So that's it.
He can't sleep without his weighted chainmail. I'd love to hear, Tim, your interpretation of this exercise. What's something from your own life that maybe you would put in this formula?
There are so many things I could draw on. I mean, do I draw on my medieval knight stuff? Do I draw on my brief dalliance in the private investigations industry? But I think we'll go with my first love, which is, of course, recruitment. I actually think a Papers, Please-esque game where you're assessing kind of CVs and people against like these maybe fantasy job descriptions or something and hiring them, and then it takes you forward to that interview stage process, because there's that game where you have to like screen guests at a hotel to make sure they're not like cryptid monsters and things like that. So you can maybe look at like people's responses, see how suitable they are for the role, and then, you know, the company either does really well in the simulation or it does poorly, and you've got to like redo how you're doing everything. But like there's so many skins that game could have. You could have it as like you're looking for people to work on your spaceship, you're looking for people to join your supernatural hunting team, you know, that, or it could be loads of spin-offs. But I actually think that's one of the most mundane things I do, which is going out, looking at people's data, essentially talking to them and thinking, you know, do I reckon this person would be good for this job, and why? I think that could be really, really fun and interesting. And there's also a demonstrable kind of market for that kind of game.
It's pretty interesting. Games recruitment, the game. I could see that getting kind of meta.
You take the role of an overworked, stressed internal games recruiter. And maybe part of the portfolio review is you could play indie games submitted by the community, and you know they get a bit of exposure that way.
Interesting. Maybe there's a meta loop where you get laid off every 8 to 12 months, and you have to find a new job yourself.
There's a feature in. Have you used Tabletop Simulator before? It's like a physics simulator that lets you make board games and stuff, but you can have a tablet in that. You can have like an iPad in there, and you can link it to Chrome instances. So you could actually like play people's itch.io games on that, I think. I don't know how well it would work, but you could. Yeah, we're getting to like gameception here with games inside
would
of
be
games.
Games
and stuff.
inside the games inside the games.
I mainly use it for D&D or playing Warhammer because I'm too poor for the figurines. So, playing itch games is just the next level. I like that.
Jason says, Jason from LinkedIn says, imagine interviewing AI agents. It turns into papers, please, and you have to detect if they're AI or not, maybe.
Oh, that'd be so funny. Well, you'd know because they'd interrupt you halfway through by parroting back what you've just said as a question.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Alec also has one here. Alec says, I worked in an art museum in college, and damn if that wouldn't make a perfect stealth extraction game where you don't know the value of stolen paintings, but have to guess based on how they make you feel. See painting, make subjective value judgment, steal, find out if it's worth anything.
I like that.
I like that.
That's
yeah.
pretty good. Amazing. All right.
Yeah, that's
You went
cool.
to Paris recently, were you?
Where's the Mona Lisa? It was Alec. All right, I want to make sure we do have some time for a couple of community questions. It's a great exercise for anybody who is listening to the stream. One of the things I love about this podcast is we get a lot of these reps. We get a lot of these activities that you can do on your own to get some of those reps in. And as with anything, I guarantee that game development, game design, and really all areas of games is a practicable skill. So the more you do things like this, the better you will get at it inherently. Just set yourself objectives. So if a game is for fun, then great, have fun. If a game is for commercial success, then rep that as well. A couple of questions for you. So Laughing Umbra says, from the games that you are getting sent, do you see any trends popping up in the indie devs in indie dev in general in 2025?
It's hard to see the submitted games that way as like indicative of trends, because I think I've already got a narrow group of people that genuinely want feedback, which already places them outside of the people that are working on something for 6 months, stick it straight into the next fest when it's half finished kind of thing. So it's hard to say regarding trends. I think people are starting to understand format. And what I mean by that is we'll take the success of something like Balatro, and instead of making Balatro, they'll take the scoring mechanisms of Balatro and try and do totally different things with them. So you get things like Luck Be a Landlord, or just like I saw a Balatro like that used pairs, where you just turn the cards over and try and match the pairs, but the way the deck upgrades worked was really good. And I normally hate games that use memory, but because the whole game was memory, it was kind of okay. So I think people are starting to understand format a bit better and understand that like you can take like the scoring system from this and you can apply it to a totally different activity. You just need to understand if they fit together. So it's hard to say in terms of trends because I don't really look for them. I try and focus on like what the individual game is trying to achieve. Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. The term I ran into, I think maybe 2 years ago at GDC, was the 90-10 rule. I don't know if you've heard that yourself, which is 90% of your systems and mechanics should actually be lifted from other games and only about 10% should be innovated. It harkens back to something you said earlier in this episode, which is like your weird budget. The more systems and mechanics you have that your player is already familiar with, the more comfortable they're going to be with some weird stuff tacked on. And I think that that's really true. Like, I like the idea of a memory game that has Balatro on there, because then a Balatro player will recognize the Balatro elements and will be like, ooh, fresh application of this thing that I like. Alec has an interesting question for you. I wonder this one myself. Alex says, do you believe that the Darkest Dungeon fake game approach is ethical and smart? Could I, as an artist, animate an entire trailer of non-existent game in order to hire a programmer after funding?
I think you would just declare it up front. You would say what the game is, what the video is representative of, and what it's not. And I think Darkest Dungeon is a weird example, but I think they probably would have had quite a robust list of what the game mechanics were going along with that. So it's not like, hey, here's a piece of concept art, I don't know what the game is, And we do see lots of Kickstarters like that. We see Kickstarters where it's like story first, 3 paragraphs of lore, and then you get to the game description and it's like, I don't know, it's an RPG, something like that. I don't know. So I don't think there's anything unethical about doing it. I mean, ethics comes down to consent really, and like a lot of it comes down to consent and letting people know what it is you're doing and what you're asking for, and what is known and what isn't. So I don't think there's any reason you couldn't do that. And I think one of the things I'm always trying to encourage developers that are more programmers and less interested in the creative side of things is to seek out exactly that sort of person. Like if you're a solo developer and you love making game mechanics, but you don't really care about world building or marketing or anything like that, then why are you trying to do it on your own? Because that is such an important chunk of what people care about when they engage with the game. So, this is, you're exactly the sort of person that I would think would make a really good team if you could find the right technical person to work with. And I think what you're describing, okay, it might not be safe or fair to do that as a Kickstarter, but making that kind of concept art in order to try and kind of solicit a partner who can do the technical side of things is totally legitimate. And also that's kind of what concept art is for. I think if you've read Jesse Schell's Art of Game Design, one of the things he talks about quite a lot in the prototyping section is that concept art is a form of prototyping, right? So when you're prototyping a game, you make a little gray box prototype for the mechanics, but you also prototype the art and you say, this is what the art will look like. And then when you've worked out those two things, you move on to the next stage of prototyping, and then you work out what the art pipeline is for getting that style of art into that game. But it's all prototyping. So if you're coming more from that direction of like, I'm an artist that wants to creatively lead a game, then you probably need to do what you're talking about. But I would focus it less at the players and more at the members of the community that you're trying to get to work with you in the first place before you take something to the market and show it to players.
Yeah. Yeah, I think proving it, the way I've talked about it before is actually, if you've ever watched like Midjourney or any AI image generator create an image, it starts as a hazy something that kind of vaguely has shapes and gets closer and closer and closer to a final image. That I think is actually a perfect metaphor for the process of prototyping and building a game. There's a million different ways to get an idea if something is promising, and it's just how hazy they are to dictate the actual final version. A piece of concept art is only going to give you so much information. It's not actually representative of the gameplay. It's not actually representative of whether or not it'll do well, but it will tell you if people think it's a cool idea, and that's one step towards a full picture.
The studio once, their art director literally showed me a physical collage they made of like pictures they printed out, cuttings from magazines and things like that. And they're like, hey, this is kind of the vibe we're going for, in terms of like how the game will visually look and what the kind of atmospheric textures will feel like. They were a very esoteric individual, and it was awesome working with them. But like, it doesn't have to be actually making concept art. In writing, you might use a mood board. So like, you might just have like a bunch of screenshots from popular characters that have inspired aspects of a character you're writing. It's all, any kind of thinking you're doing is kind of prototyping in my opinion, if it's informing the game.
I think that's really true.
Just to like one practical consideration, because I know we will have like art people here who don't think of themselves as technical people. If you ever eavesdrop on tech people when they're talking about art people, they think we're lazy, right? So you need to put some sort of graft in and show anyone who would potentially work with you and do the technical side of things, program the thing, or build you tools so you can build the thing. That's kind of what traditionally happened in game studios. Someone builds a level editor and you make the levels. You need to show them that you're a grafter. So every time you're getting out this big portfolio of like all of these sketches, all of these different character drawings, you're getting rid of the concern that most kind of potential technical partners would have, which is that you just draw a picture and then disappear for a month, which is a fair, that is a lot of people's experience when they've done game jams with more artistic people who are less structured and sort of just have fits and starts of creativity, So it's always worth putting the work in, because even if you don't get anywhere with it, you've had some really good practice, you know.
I actually, something that you might be alluding to here, an opinion that I don't know if I've really expressed on this show before. I think solo development is for very few actual people. I think it has a romance to it. People love the idea of the solo developer, and part of that is basically because we're humans and we don't want to deal with other humans, and we don't want to deal with people that we don't like, because there's going to be days we don't like our coworkers. But I really think that it's a bit of a trap, and there are very few people that I think can effectively solo develop. And I think the vast majority of games are better for having many minds contributing to them. So yeah, maybe start playing around with art, mock-ups, and getting closer to something that's compelling, but find people to collaborate with, sooner than later. Just find people that you work well with, and, vet them a little bit and make sure it's a good relationship. All right, I think it is. We're actually a little over time because it's been a great conversation. But I think, Tim, that's going to wrap us up for the day. Before then, we like to do two different things here.
Yeah. So first of all, Joe, do you have any exercises, extra credit, or homework that people could do in the next week or so to apply what they've learned and imbibed here today?
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking a little bit more on the hedgehog concept. So, what's the thing that you could do? And the thing is, this might not even be making a game, right? It might be that you come away with all of your knowledge that you've got so far of game dev, and you decide you're going to set up a club for teaching people fundamentals, or you're going to become some sort of marketer or something like that. But I think doing the hedgehog concept exercise. So again, the three criteria is like, what's something that people will pay you for that you are uniquely passionate about and care about, and that uses your skills? So it could be copywriting for indie game devs. It could be, like you don't know. And then, and yeah, just think about things from that perspective. It might not be the most exciting set of things you come up with, but it might give you some guidance on what you end up working on in future. And if you focus it on game dev, then think of it more like a skills audit of like, what am I really good at? What do I enjoy but I'm not so good at? And then that can either guide you towards who you should be working with if it's collaboration, or if you do want to make games on your own or in a very small team, you can start to think of like, well, I'm just going to rule that out. Like I don't make games in 3D. That's not my thing. The asset workflow to go from nothing to a guy I made moving around on the screen is just way too long. So I don't make games in 3D, right? And it's I think if you do those kind of exercises, it's kind of like the more doors you shut, the easier it becomes to know where to go next, because there are less options, right? And making decisions is often about deciding what not to do until you get to the point where the thing to do next is really obvious,
All right, so there you have it, everyone. Your extra credit is to work on the hedgehog concept and put some work into that. If you feel able to, why not put it on LinkedIn? Tag us so we can look at it, or post it in the Indie Game Academy Discord, and we can get our eyeballs on that. Willem, I think it's you next.
All right. Before we go, Joe, the last thing we like to do here is, of course, just to give you a chance to promote and give us any last words of wisdom. So anything you'd like to plug or any last thoughts?
I don't have any words of wisdom, I'm afraid. I'm all run out of them. But yeah, just follow the channel if you don't already. It's not like what most game dev channels are on YouTube, because I'm there fundamentally to be, a conduit for other people's games to be shown through. I'm not there kind of advertising what I'm making. I am making stuff on there as well. I've got a game maker stream I do every Tuesday at the moment. But yeah, come hang out there and submit your games if you've got one. I saw someone in the chat submitted a game before. I do, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not able to cover multiplayer games at the moment just because I'm not set up for it. But it's really good practice. Submit your games to things. Okay, yeah, I do have a word of wisdom. I've just I just realized
you already said you didn't, so we have to. That's it.
Every time I do mentoring, the same thing comes up. Is that you go from working for other people to working for yourself or doing something for yourself. And from practice that you don't do anything unless you have a deadline. But it usually takes people years to realize that they need to set their own deadlines, right? So whatever project you're working on, if you don't have a deadline for that, just set one completely arbitrarily. It could be like, I'm getting this to this stage. I'm getting this game into public alpha by December. If you have local events or game jams, you could submit something to. It could be a local event that's not directly games related. It could be like a local comics convention that are quite happy for people to show up and play test. I've done stuff like that before with board game conventions. Just pick a point in the calendar and set yourself deadlines so that the thing becomes real. And yeah, accountability buddies help a lot too. But otherwise, you'll just end up endlessly tinkering on things and never finishing anything. So that would be the piece of advice I give, and that's kind of what I do, why I do what I do. You know, there are people submit their games and they have a deadline to get some feedback, and then it's become a game because someone else has played it. And the amount of people just releasing games that have never been played by anyone is wild. So even just putting your game through 2 or 3 rounds of feedback before you release it will put you ahead of 90% of the people releasing games on Steam at the moment, because they're not really designing games. They're just making an exe in a game engine and then hoping someone buys it off them, you know.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having lunch with us today, Joe. And thank you to those of you who asked questions, and of course, everyone else who's listening. This is why we do it. There will be links to our Discord down below in the chat, which Willem will be posting, I am sure.
And there are links to anything else we mentioned in the episode. So go check out Indie Game Clinic. Go check out Joe Baxter-Webb. And it has been an absolute pleasure, everyone. I think that's going to do it. Until next week, we'll be here every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Hey.
Goodbye.
Game over.
Adios, y'all. All right. And those who are watching on the stream, we love you. Goodbye. Good luck. Don't die.